Hi guys, and welcome back to day 23 of Inktober. So today is probably my biggest piece of Inktober so far, and I would probably say also that it's one of my biggest pieces that I've done traditionally for quite a long time now. I prefer working small, I like small pieces, but there's just a very different dynamic of working bigger. There's different compositional things that I can do that I'm a lot more limited when it's smaller. So it was really fun to be able to work on a different size, but also very different dimensions than I normally do, because this one is much, much longer and narrower than I normally work on. I just actually took the piece of watercolor that I normally tear down, and usually I tear it like hot dog style, but this time I tore it hamburger style, so it's actually really narrow. So I have another piece that's also really narrow like this, and it's just interesting to work in a very different dimension like this. Like I said, it's a real breath of fresh air because there's a whole different composition that I have to work with, and it's really good to be able to mix things up like this every once in a while and to be able to reanalyze some of the compositional crutches that I use, or the same way that I set things up and the same way that I have these images. So it was a really good chance to freshen up on how I wanted to show things. But also, when I started sketching this one out, I wanted to do something that was very Art Nouveau inspired, definitely Alphonse Mucha. I mean, when I did that artist tag thing and I was talking about my influences, and I was thinking about Alphonse Mucha because I brought him up, and it just made me want to do something that had that kind of aesthetic to it. I love artwork from that time period and architecture, so I was looking up a lot of his work and a lot of other stuff from that time period, and ultimately I decided to use some of those very Art Deco kind of style into my piece, like this half moon shape underneath her that was very reminiscent of that. And I decided that I wanted to do much more in the gold for this piece, which I ended up going a little bit too far on that one, which was okay because both the gold and the black that I have are very opaque, so I was able to cover both of those up and switch them out a little bit. At the very beginning, I wanted to get the background done and then work on her, so I put down gold on like all of the background elements except for that circular area where it goes under her and a little bit behind her. And I think it was just a little bit overloaded. There was no longer like a layering effect. It was more like she was like floating just on this gold background, and I didn't really like that effect as much as I thought that I thought it would look good. So I ended up deciding that either the bottom portion needed to be black or the top portion needed to be black, and I ended up going with the top portion black and the bottom part gold. And I did do several thumbnails where I started deciding where I actually wanted those two placements, and it's always hard doing thumbnails for things like this. I don't know, I'm sure there are other people who are a lot better at it, but I feel like when I do thumbnails for things like this, I find one that I like and then I execute it, and then in the actual picture itself I don't like it anymore, and sometimes I have to make changes. But this one was just, it took a little bit to see how it actually affected the piece and then how I could make it more fine-tuned to the final effect that I wanted. But I'm definitely getting ahead of myself. I mean, we're still watching the line work part here, but when I did do this one, I did want to think about making sure that I didn't go too far, because with my last piece, like I mentioned, I really liked the line work a lot, but then when I started adding the ink washes and everything, it started taking it away from that, and it didn't look as pure as I wanted it to. It didn't have that crisp line work anymore. So that was one thing that I wanted to be very careful of in this piece, and in the end I actually think I was pretty successful, at least to the point that I wanted it to be. I wanted her to be very crisp. I didn't want a lot of water washes, ink washes, there we go, ink washes on top of her. So I wanted her to have a very muted kind of look. A lot of the paper coming through, I wanted a lot of white on her. So it was definitely nice to be able to take this chance as I was doing the line work to really think through how I wanted to treat the values for her so that it could have that look that I wanted. And it was nice because I was able to really just enjoy putting down all these line works, and knowing that I had learned my lesson on the last one, that I was not going to cloud that up. It was kind of a breath of fresh air to know that it was going to be something that was going to still stand strong in the final piece, and I wasn't going to accidentally mess it up by going too far. At least I think that having that frame of mind of thinking about I don't want to take it too far is what helped me not take it too far. I was being much more conscious about what I was going to put on top of her, and when I did get to that point, I was very careful about what I was about to put down and making sure that I didn't go too dark too fast, and I knew what values I wanted for her, which were very light. So yeah, in the end, I feel definitely a lot better about this one than I did last time. I just feel like I got the look that I wanted, which was I wanted the line work to be a lot more of the focal point. But I definitely think that this piece really helped me gain a lot more confidence in doing these longer strokes with a brush. Because in some of the earlier ones that I've done, when I just started getting back into using the brush and ink, which is something that I like using fairly frequently, but when it goes by for a couple of weeks, I get definitely rusty. There were a couple of pieces where I felt very rusty, and I felt like I was taking much smaller strokes than I would like to have because I needed to be able to get it the same width that I wanted it to. So I felt like I had to be a lot more careful, and I was making a little bit more mistakes as far as the wobbliness of the line. So this piece having so many really long strokes that doing these short little like building up ones, it would work, but ultimately it would look a little rougher and it would take way more time. So this really just kind of threw me back in the deep end of making sure that I was doing long, smooth strokes, and it was really pleasant. It actually didn't take too long before I kind of got used to how the brush itself handled, because it is a new brush, and that's really important, just knowing how much pressure you need to put on to get the kind of width that you need for your line work. And also the brush that I'm using, it's super, super cheap, by the way. I know I mentioned this, but it was just like a 4-pack of tiny brushes for like $5. But this brush, it like all the bristles like have this little hook at the end, so I've gotten used to where I can like take that little hook and just at the very tip of it spread on this really thin line. So I'm starting to get used to what the brushes behave and how this new ink behaves, and I think that I'm being able to get a lot more confident lines. I think it's just mileage, getting used to all your media and getting the hand motions right. I definitely noticed that I was beginning to get a lot better at like fluidly stroking it and getting the arc in my hand as well as in my wrist. So yeah, I feel a lot better about going into doing much more smooth, long, oriented pieces like this, where there's a lot of arcing lines that just have to be very smooth and graceful, and I kind of need to get it in 1 or 2 strokes for these lines. And here's the point where I start looking at what I have and the gold that I've already put down and realizing that it's not quite what I wanted. It's flooding it and overwhelming it, and it wasn't like this beautiful mass of gold that I imagined in my head. But that was when I started troubleshooting and figuring out how can I make this a little bit more of what I wanted. And one of the things that I was starting to realize is the gold on the bottom was just a little too solid. I wanted to have more decorative elements there, and I knew that it would help break it up and bring some of that black down, so it wouldn't just be like black value and then gold all on its own. So I ended up doing some really thin strokes, as well as some that kind of came in and hit it at an angle. And I really like having like these lines that can kind of intersect like that, or not intersect, but ones that butt up against them at different angles and stuff. That's kind of a type of line work that I like to incorporate a lot. I actually ended up using that a little bit in kind of those like spokes of that half moon area, but I go back in at the very end when I add in the like cross hatching, almost herringbone texture to it, or pattern, I guess. But yeah, that was when I was just starting to think about, okay, where can I really finesse this to make sure that it all comes together and it looks finished in the way that I want it to, rather than a little bit unfinished and a little too blocky. Also, I think probably the saddest thing about these videos where I use a lot of gold is that from where I'm sitting, the light is hitting it at this perfect angle, so it's just so sparkly and glinting, and it looks gorgeous as I'm working on it. But then when I rewatch these videos, because the angle of the light is in a certain way that I want it to, so that it doesn't create a shadow from my hand, it looks really dull, and it almost looks like you can like see through and kind of see the strokes, and it looks a lot less even than it does in real life. So I wish that I could just like have a better way of showing how absolutely gorgeous this gold is to work with. It just, as you're working with it, it looks really beautiful and it's really sharp and it looks really opaque. I am actually really happy with the opaqueness of this. There were some areas that I did have to go over it twice, especially the area where I actually made it black and then decided to make it gold. I went over it twice, but then I had full coverage with that and it worked great. And I actually used that heat gun on top of the gold ink and I didn't have any issues at all with that. So if you're going to do something like that, I had the same effect as I did with my black ink and with the ink washes and watercolors. So yeah, that was really helpful because I was changing up a lot of these things. I was able to dry it off really fast and then move on and start adding the next layer on top of it. But that is everything for today's Inktober. I am really happy that I did something a lot larger and a different dimension because it felt so fresh and new and exciting, and I had the opportunity to try out a lot of new things rather than getting kind of stuck in the same repetitive way that I think I have been a little bit for a while now. So I was really happy with this one, and I do have another long one, so I might actually do another long piece in a couple of days for Inktober so I can experiment with a different kind of composition that I could create with a long kind of canvas like this. But as usual, the original is available at my shop, and see, now you can see the glinting a little bit better. I just wish that it showed in the video itself when I was doing it, but yeah, it's really shiny. It's a super shiny thing. But yes, she is available. I'm getting sidetracked. She's available. There's a button right in the corner where you can check out my shop and see all the other little goodies that I have. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for my next Inktober.